So hello everyone, my name is Brother Fortune Francis Chakasara, I'm Marist brother. My main area of expertise is children's rights and child safeguarding. I got into this area as early as 2012 when I started working with an organization for the Marist brothers, which is called Foundation for Marist International Solidarity, FMSI, which is a UN ECOSOC status. That means that we are allowed or we have permission to raise issues to do with children's rights up to the United Nations level in Geneva, in Switzerland, where we work with our brothers in this area, the Edmund Rice Foundation and the Franciscans International. For us, we value children's rights and human rights in particular because this forms the basis of our foundation. When we look at the life of St. Marcelin Champagne, who is our founder, his first experience at school for me was very key, a major violation of human rights and children's rights, where corporal punishment formed part and parcel of the disciplining of children in France. And once our founder had this terrible experience, which was traumatic for him, he made sure that he had to found our institute and that we had to defend the rights of the children, and especially those in the most neglected areas. In doing so, the brothers deliberately started an organization, an NGO, that is the FMSI, which has its headquarters in Rome and also offices in Geneva. For what we are doing specifically at this moment, we designed a program for Africa called Child Rights Strategic Intervention Plan for Africa and Madagascar. Our main aim is basically to raise awareness on matters to do with human rights and children's rights in Africa and Madagascar, raising awareness to mostly educators, people in the educational space, the communities where we find our schools in, and also to the children at large. This is a lifelong process program, if you want to call it, because it's a strategic intervention. So it does not have a date where we say we have accomplished it, because issues to do with human rights, issues to do with children's rights are continuous. They are part and parcel of our lives. I'll just explain in brief what this program is about. This program is about ourselves conscientizing communities. We are not coming in to say people do not know that, or children do not know that they don't have rights. They do have. There are always structures in communities and societies, especially on the continent of Africa. But we are coming to remind each other to say, how best do we put this into practice? We are also coming in to remind government, a lot of governments in Africa, for their major obligation, especially on the right to education. That is our main focus. As you are aware now that a good number of children, over 23 million children in sub-Saharan Africa are out of school. This is a worrying statistic that once we hear this, we need to raise our heads to say, what are our governments doing? If we look at the UNCRC, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, Article 28 clearly states that state parties must make sure that children receive quality education. But when you look at the reality of what is happening in a good number of African countries, is that the primary education is neither free nor accessible. It's also there's also a lack of legislation on the ground to make sure that parents or guardians or anyone who is in charge of children makes sure that they go to school. And if they don't, government must make sure that they put legislation on the ground to follow up and make sure that these kids access education. It is a worrying factor, but I always come back to the priorities. Most of our African governments, they do not prioritize education. For example, if you just look at the mayor budgets, look at what our governments are spending money in. Mostly it's defense, yet we are not in war at all. The military expenditure is quite high, yet things like health and education are not easily accessible. And these are basic human rights. We talk about the right to survival and development, means that people have a right to access quality health systems, quality education systems, but this is not so in most cases on the ground. I also want to say that there are efforts that are being done. There are countries that are working hand in hand with civic society, and they are trying to make sure that change is being effected in many communities. But the efforts, when you compare the efforts to what is on the ground, we still need to do more. Hence, as Marist Brothers, through FMSI, we have begun a lot of programs in Africa. Some of them are intervention programs. For example, emergency relief, giving food to those areas, particularly to children, so that they are able to come to school. So there are feeding schemes that are running in different countries in Africa. So we are using these as kind of a bait so that when kids come to school, they eat, they get educated, and they go home. There are so many advantages while we are trying to express the right to education for the African child at the moment. The longer we keep our children in school, the more we get them away from things like child labor. Because they're spending most of their time in the school, hence they are protected from child labor. Because they are spending most of their times in the school, they are protected from child abuse, sexual abuse, because they are finding themselves in safer educational spaces like schools. So the longer we keep our children in school, we also have some of the benefits that come with that. Apart from these children being exposed to education, these children being exposed to the global trends of what is happening in the world. I want to cite one author that I always like to talk about, Johannes Fabian, who talks about the theory of coevalence, denial of coevalence, to say a child in New York City should be able to enjoy the same rights with a child in a village in Africa. Is this happening? Precisely, no. Why? Because children find themselves in different contexts. The New Yorker is in a different context. A child in an African village is in a different context. But we are saying if it's education, these kids must be able to access the education that is relevant to wherever they are in different countries. And if it is health, they must also be able to access health facilities depending on wherever they are. So on behalf of FMSI and the Marist world, would like to thank everyone in the Marist space, particularly for the most important responsibility that you do. That is to make sure that children who are entrusted in our care are kept safe at all times. I'm actually glad to say this, that in a good number of the schools, there's a lot of implementation in terms of child safeguarding and child rights awareness. We need to keep on that positive spirit and continue working towards making Marist spaces and other educational spaces that are non-Marist better and safer places for children to work in. We will continue with our programs and our interaction, and we will continue to create platforms of dialogue, platforms of interaction in this great area of child safeguarding and children's rights. For those who are interested in contacting us and making sure that we continue with this dialogue in our platforms, please feel free to contact me.